Hello and welcome to the Save Our Sperns podcast. This podcast comes from the Spurn Mountains in the northwest of Northern Ireland. It's a place shaped by land, by community and by long memory. It's now living with growing pressure from mining and large-scale development. That pressure isn't unique to here. Across the world, the so-called energy transition is driving yet more extraction. There's growing demand for critical minerals and rare earth metals. And that demand is landing on local communities, asking them to live with the impact. Season 1 looked at why the Sperns matter through the voices of the people who live here and know this place well. Season 2 keeps those local voices at the centre while also stepping back a bit to look at extractivism more broadly, how it's been justified, and the economic system behind it, a system that keeps taking more and more from a finite planet. Thanks for listening. Let's begin. Today's conversation is with Gerry McGovern, who returns to the podcast to talk about his new book, 99th Day. In this episode, we're not revisiting Gerry's background or his journey through the tech world. We cover that in Season 1, podcast number 16. Instead, we're focusing on this book and what it says about the scale of mining now being driven by the energy transition, the growth of industrial infrastructure, and the vast amounts of waste, especially e-waste, being pushed onto communities across the world. 99th Day isn't an easy read, and it doesn't try to be. It asks us to look directly at what's been justified in the name of progress and who is expected to live with the consequences. Gerry, welcome back to the podcast, and it's so great to see you. And I didn't actually think I'd be seeing you so quickly. I thought it would take you probably a little bit longer in the new year before you got your book finished when we were speaking on the last time on the podcast. But here you are, with it done and dusted, and may I say congratulations, and what a terrific piece of work. Really, really terrific piece of work. And
thank you.
The research that has gone into it, and it must have taken hours. How long were you writing it for?
About 5 years, and lovely to be back, Marilla. It's about 5 years of work. Yeah, there's about 200 pages of references in it. So
yeah,
it was a lot of research.
Yeah, and for that I am eternally grateful, because if I want to know anything, I know where I'm going now, to the back of your book, because, the 200 pages of research. And just for people who are listening, the book, I think it was roughly about 600 pages long.
Yeah, and then 200 of references, so it's not an easy read either from size or from content, so it's a challenge, but hopefully a worthwhile challenge.
Yeah, well, obviously I read it myself. The length of it didn't bother me, and the actual ease of read, you can it's nice language, it's easy to read, so that, for not to put off people. The content, as I said to you, it left me completely just a feeling almost of hopelessness when the scale of the problems that we're facing with e-waste, and then before we ever get to e-waste, the scale of mining that's going to occur because of the scale of e-waste in the world, and how we are completely devouring the earth. And do you know, I've been in this game for 30 odd years. I've been part of the organic movement and grown my own food and all of that. So I wasn't unaware of it. It's not new to me, but the scale of it is new to me. I could not, and reading it around Christmas time wasn't just the best time of the year to be reading it, because all I could see around me was consumerism in every single direction. But by all that, I'm really glad that book exists in the world, and it's seminal. It's what's needed right now. and fair play to you for
Thank
it.
you.
So let me ask you a question. When you were writing it, did you think at all about the tone and how it would land with the reader?
Yeah, to some, I think as you go through a writing process, particularly if it's a long process, it changes and sometimes changes you, and what you expect or what you start out with is not what you end up with. So, as I, went and dug up the research and I kind of read and talked to people, I tried to talk to as many people, particularly ordinary people that had been, so to speak, ordinary people who had been impacted. So I wanted, to have voices of just ordinary people living with this sort of mining waste or pollution and the impacts on their lives. So it would be a kind of a witness statement of sort that even if we can't stop it, and I don't think we can stop the civilizational crash that's coming, but I do think we can save a lot of our environment for what comes after the civilizational crash. And I think that became, in a way, the theme or the way of writing, that it's a kind of a message to the good ancestors out there to think intergenerationally about these issues, and that what we do we may never see any benefit or reaction in our lifetime, but we should try and pass on as much as we can to those who will continue to keep these messages alive over many generations. Because I think what is happening now is not something that's going to be concluded within 3 or 5 or 10 years. It's a long process. That's this civilizational collapse that is beginning. I think at the moment, and that as I wrote it, that sense of that this is a witness statement and a kind of a record, and something that hopefully can be intergenerational for the people who come after us. So that was a kind of the message or the tone of. I did try and keep it as clear and as simple as I could, as well as part of that.
Yeah, and that came across very clearly to me. It really is. It is a witness statement of our times, and I think my question around it was what to do with what to do with the knowledge, and how to use the knowledge in a positive way as opposed to creating a dystopian future for ourselves, and that's really what it stung me.
Yeah. It's the same with me discovering, and I think one of the key moments in the book for me was when I talked to Tom Murphy, who obviously must have some Irish roots, but he's an astrophysicist in the University of California, an extraordinary figure. He has this blog called Do the Math, and like he built solar panels in 2008 himself, like built different models testing, all sorts of variants of energy consumption, etc., etc. And he very much came to the conclusion, when I asked him about renewable energy and difference in fossil fuels, and he says, well, it's essentially the difference between decapitation and a bullet through the head. And then we were talking later, and he says, people often say to me, I'm a pessimist or I'm a doomer or stuff like that. And he says, I don't see myself in that way really at all, because, it depends what you're trying to save, and it depends what you really care about. If you really care about civilization, if you really are trying to save this civilization, then yes, I'm a doomer and I'm a pessimist. But if you're really trying to save life, the birds and the bees and the forests and the water and the good soil and the good earth, then I'm an optimist, because I think it won't destroy everything. As destructive and devouring as this global civilization has become, there will be life that remains, and our job is to leave as much of that in as good a condition as possible for those who follow after us, but also, I think, to leave the lessons of how this happened, what caused it, and how we work against it, so that it doesn't happen again, so that the human... Because one of the things I noticed in a lot of the indigenous societies was they were full of warnings. You see, I think a lot of these indigenous societies, whether they were the Aborigines in Australia, they went through their civilizational collapses probably multiple times. The first people arriving in a land did incredible damage, whether in North and South America or in Australia or in Europe. And I think the indigenous that became indigenous to the land learned a lot of the lessons of what not to do, and they encoded those into their stories and into their cultures. And I think that, I would hope, in a tiny, tiny way, that this would be a tiny little bit of encoding into what comes after, about what to avoid and what not to do, with a little bit of what to do, in the process. So, I don't think it's pessimistic from the point of view of life and the environment, some sort of a decent environment. But I think it is pessimist from the point of view of this civilization that we have in front of us. I don't think this civilization is savable. And in fact, I think the quicker it crashes, the less overall damage it will actually do.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. And I think you're exactly right. And then I think to examples of civilizations that have died out in the past, for exactly the same reasons as what's occurring for us. The overuse of resources and lack of care for the generations coming after us, And have we learned from that? Do we ever learn as human beings? That's the thing, isn't it?
Well, we do learn, but we forget, or I've read books about, even in Europe, about and this is the irony of things that I discovered, that, the scientific revolution may have been progress in one sense, but from an environmental point of view, it was devastating, and it set off this devastating arrogance of men in particular. But this whole scientific revolution and the rise of capitalism was fought extraordinarily actively in Europe. It was not an easy... People did not give in easily to the elites. It required centuries of war and all the elements from the witch burnings. The witch burnings were essentially the destruction of female power and female-based medicine, etc. So I think we learned lots and lots of people, but greedy men were so powerful and so relentless that they ultimately were able to push through to the point that we are now, that we are dominated by the arrogance of greedy men such as Musk and Trump and otherwise. Yeah. But the general human family did not give in easily to these greedy men. This wasn't a broad acceptance. It was driven by a kind of this relentless energy of these psychotic, narcissistic men. And I think that was the most disturbing lesson I learned of all, is how that at the bottom of an awful lot of these causes is the rise of a certain type of male figure within societies. And I saw in Indigenous communities the warnings about these
The big man.
people, the big man, and the hunter, and whether in the Johannesburg in the Kalahari Desert or the Aborigines in Australia and all over the world, one of the biggest fear of Indigenous communities was the rise of the big man. That signified a really destructive and nihilistic period in that society.
Yeah, that really stood out for me. That I'd never thought of it like that, and you're completely correct, picking up on that from the Indigenous communities, the rise of the big man. And you only have to look at the world today, and it's happening again. It's not women who are. And I try to take a very balanced view about this. Let's call them people with penises.
Yeah.
I was going to say to you, off topic, very much off topic. Some time ago, I was reading a book about the folk in the Kalahari, and they were absolutely astonished. I can't remember the name of the book and I can't remember the writer, but he spent some time with them in the mid to late 50s, and he wrote up about his experience. He travelled with them. Now he wasn't an anthropologist or anything like that. He was just an ordinary Joe Soap. And the Kalahari, the folk in the Kalahari, and I'm talking about what would have been formerly known as the Pygmies, but I can't remember their correct term.
Johannesburg, I think.
Johannesburg, yeah. And they were astonished to find out that the white man couldn't hear the stars speaking. This was a complete... It was a source of amazement to the whole community. And, it just makes me wonder, what knowledge have we lost? In the world? What knowledge have we lost in the world?
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And yeah, so sad and such an extraordinary... Yeah, I heard about... If you come across the name of that book, please send it, because I heard that story before as well. And it's this sense of humility and gratitude and listening and it's I read a somewhat connected a writer who I can't remember, just Tyson somebody, I think is from Australian Aboriginal Australian writer. I think the book is called Sand Talk. It's in the references of the book, but he was talking about meeting a young fella, a young Aboriginal, who would speak to him for ages about rocks, about how, he'd communicate with rocks and how, the sacredness of rocks and how they contain so much history and these sorts of things we laugh at. We've been trained that we're so smart and we're so clever and yet we're so smart and we're so clever and we're destroying the only home we have. We're so smart and so clever and we're destroying our soil and our water and our mountains and our rivers and our air, and we're filling them with chemicals and plastics and we're so clever.
Yeah, I know.
We think we're the clever people, that we've figured all this stuff out, and that all this knowledge, as you say, that has not so much in some ways been lost, but has been deliberately destroyed.
Yeah, our arrogance. Our arrogance is just it's unbelievable.
Arrogance is a great way to describe it.
I suppose let's come back to the book, though we've never really left it. But so in the book, you were very clear that the push for green technologies and energy transition is driving a new wave of mining. Have you a view about the energy transition at all? And I know you said there's no such thing as energy transition. And I too was sucked into this green technology, energy transition, thinking, yeah, this is the way to go, and being ignorant about the actually what would happen in the future, or not thinking it through from when the materials are actually mined to the final output at the other end. And oh yeah, we get a little bit lower carbon, but we also get all of this.
Yeah.
So, like, what's your feeling around all of that? Aside from like the damage that energy transition does, have you a bigger picture around it?
Well, yeah, I think it's part of what I call in the book the growth debt cult. That if we just get more. So we've never had more coal mined, we've never had more oil mined, never had more gas. So they're bringing back nuclear because we are driven by the growth debt cult. We get more of everything. So, and this has been historically the case as well. So there have never been transitions. Each energy source has fed off each other. So they were cutting down more wood during the mining boom for shafts in the mines than they'd burned before the mining boom began. Mm-hmm. To allow the oil industry to flourish, they needed a huge quantity of steel for the pipes and the pipelines and all those sorts of things. And to get that steel, they needed more coal. So all of these feed each other. 14,000 football fields of tropical forests are cut down every single year in Myanmar just for the charcoal to make the silicon for the solar panels in the process. So it's all feeding off each other. But and I was part of selling it up until very recently. I had solar panels on the house in 2010. But one thing that struck me initially, but I pushed it to the back of my head. I'd be out walking a bit and I'd see these huge wind turbines, and it just seemed odd, like it just seemed strange. Is this how we saved the world? By putting these in the mountains, by putting these in the bogs? Weren't these places the places we were supposed to be saving in the process? And so that kept there, and then you'd hear all the whole language that they're wind farms and they're solar farms, like as if the wind machines had sex in autumn, and a little baby wind machine got born in March and frolicked in the fields, and then grew up to be a big wind machine, and then when it died, it organically fed the crop. I mean, these are full of the worst poisons, rare earths and coppers. I mean, we need to mine more copper in the next 25 years for all this wind and for all the electrical infrastructure around it than we mined in the previous 7,000 years. And, and copper mining is among the most damaging types of mining ever existed. And it becomes even more damaging every year because of ore ratio declines. In 1920, 1 ton of copper created 30 ton of waste. In 2020, 1 ton of copper creates 180 tons of waste. So all of this stuff, but we're sold. It's maybe it's not green, but of course all these lies. You talk to these people and you say, but it's not green, and immediately most of them go, no, it's not green, but it's not as bad as. So they know they're using the language wrong, because people believe this stuff. When you say green, people believe you. Mm-hmm. Ordinary people believe you. They listen to you, they believe you. When you say clean, They believe. But when I talk to these experts, of course nobody thinks it's clean. It's just less dirt. But they use the language of farms and clean and renew. This is energy industry propaganda, because there is no transition. So you get the worst of all worlds. You get the Andes being wiped out for the lithium. The Andes, the section of the Andes in Argentina, in Chile, in Bolivia, being literally wiped out ecosystems just to get lithium for all of these wonderful, clean and green machines. And we're told, yeah, but that's okay. That sacrifice is okay because there's going to be a transition. But and they say, oh, but look at China. Look at all the great stuff that China's doing. And China's doing lots of great stuff in wind and solar. But it's not for saving the planet. It's for energy independence. And China is building 6 times as many coal plants every year than the entire world combined. So China is doing the classic everything in the process. So number one, we have this thing here that's extraordinarily damaging in multiple other ways other than CO2 damage. And number two, there is no transition. So you get the worst of every world in the process. So we're essentially, as environmentalists, we're useful idiots of the energy industry. I mean, who better to promote this stuff than environmentalists? Who could be a better marketer of it than an environmentalist? And how can we, there's no place left. You can't go for a walk now anywhere practically in the world, in the mountains or wherever. There's no peace left. There's a wind turbine everywhere now. And we need to build somewhere between 15 to 20 times more of them to even get close to producing enough energy. It's just all cynical, deeply cynical craziness from people in the growth debt cult that believe that growth is everything and that everything begins and stops with growth. So, it's a very cynical charade we live within at the moment, this so-called green transition and the fake renewable energy.
You were speaking about Argentina there and it being completely wiped out in pursuit of lithium mining. What do you think about this whole notion of sacrificial communities and if growth isn't everything, that we have to turn around and actively change our economic system and move towards degrowth? How do you think this will impact on communities everywhere? There's 2 questions in that, really.
Yeah.
Sorry, and one is bigger than the other.
well, take the first one. Yeah, modern imperialism, or all 2,000 years, or depends how we gauge the length of the human species. But whatever we want to call it, imperialism, colonialism, capitalism, the growth debt cult, is always about sacrifice of others and sacrificial zones and green sacrifice zones and others. And I mean, you can see, I have a quote in the book from a politician or thinker in England in the 1700s or 1800s saying, let's sacrifice New England so as we don't have to sacrifice Old England. He was talking about the forest.
That's right.
So we're totally aware, and Europe has been the fulcrum of these poisonous ideas that have brought us to the 6th mass extinction. So they've always been precipitated on other peoples and other areas being the sacrifice zones, so as that the homeland could maintain its standards, and of course the idea was that whatever damage would happen would be contained within those sacrifice zones, that it would never spill over into the atmosphere, into the oceans, or into the other areas. But of course, it most definitely is spilling over, and the oceans are heating up faster in the Mediterranean than anywhere else. Perhaps there's a certain sense of justice that is natural justice that is coming back. Europeans are dumping e-waste in Africa, and a lot of that is seeping into the waters. And the trawlers are bottom trawling off the African coast, and then the European families are eating their smartphones, basically, or remnants of their smartphones that they threw away the previous 6 years. So those sacrifice zones, that's European history, that's European colonialism. We know the British story in Ireland. I mean, most of the oak forests were cut down, etc., etc., etc. We won't go into that although we could, but the degrowth, yeah, hard times are coming, but in quotation mark hard, this world of convenience is not going to last. Maybe we'll get 30 years, maybe we'll get 50 years, but certainly by the end of this century, there's going to be, massive collapses where the human population will go down. Tom Murphy thinks it could go down to 100 million people. Others think maybe 1 billion people. So is it a long retreat? Is it manageable? Unfortunately, I don't think it is, because I think that if you read the history of civilizational collapse, the leaders become crazier. They don't become saner. In the Roman period or the Incas, or the leaders, and we can see that with the Trump. Trump is no exception in leaders of collapsing civilizations that are on the point of actual collapse. So we'll have all of these accelerated collapses, but at some point we will be living like we were living in the 14th and 15th century in relatively smaller communities. And while we lose stuff, for sure, let's try and gain and learn as much as possible that allows for a good life. Because a lot of, there's always pluses and minuses, but a lot of those communities 3 or 4 or 5 centuries ago, we're having far more festivals and parties and singing and dancing and good times, by what we define as good times, by having great conversations and great interactions in their communities, and by listening to the stars, having great conversations with the stars. So there's so much that can be gained. A lot will be lost from the gains in. It seems like the gains in personal health care that have achieved, many of those things have been achieved by making the planet sick. That's the irony, and it's getting that balance of how do we live sustainably within our environment, and so it's we're not going to have. Kids are not going to have mobile phones. We're not going to have 70-inch televisions. We're not going to be living like this in 50 to 100 years, maybe in 30 to 40 years. I don't know when it's going to happen, but we certainly won't see the end of this century without cataclysmic changes to these things that we call the civilizations of today.
Yeah, and I suppose because we can see it and people like us can see it, and it's very clear. It's very clear. But I have many friends who are, about my age, retired or whatever, and I can't even have this conversation with them. They would rather play their golf, or they would rather go off on the cruises, and I perhaps had this conversation with you before, and it worries me because, many of them are very intelligent people, They've done well in life academically and so on, and absolute refusal of engagement around these issues. They make gestures towards it, we recycle or whatever, and they're patently intelligent people.
But that's their problem, Marilla. That's another thing I don't know whether I discovered writing the book or earlier. Intelligence is the problem. Intelligence is not wisdom. Intelligence is the thing that creates arrogance, that creates, we figured this out, I'm an engineer, I know it. It's intelligence that has caused this.
Yeah.
If we had, or a certain type of intelligence, as we were talking earlier, this very male, clinical, separate intelligence,
left brain
separation, in the process that rose with the scientific revolution. So it is very intelligent people that are the least accessible to these messages because they don't have the capacity for wisdom. They don't have the capacity to integrate themselves back into the environment. They got to where they were by being intelligent, and being intelligent in this civilization or society involves the destruction of this nature. So for them to recognize what you're saying to them requires a whole reevaluation of their entire lives and what they've done in their entire lives. And people don't want to do that. The people who have been, so to speak, running the thing don't want to recognize that they were running the sixth mass extinction, that they were the guards in the gas chambers of nature. They're not going to recognize that. And it is their very intelligence which is the greatest stop for them to do that. So we're never, unfortunately, I think if we reach 5% of the population, we'll be lucky. The vast majority are the prison guards, and willing prison guards of the sixth mass extinction. So but there are those who do want to hear, and I suppose it's finding those, and maybe it's, as we say, we leave these witness statements so that there's something that when a serious crash, because I think we'll have rolling crashes. It won't happen in one singular event. We'll have these rolling crashes. I think after each one will probably be a doubling and a trebling down, but there might just be space for enough people to say, hey, what have we done? Can we change in a different way? So there might just be that space as well, but they'll need the models and the ways of living, and there's a lot of people doing really amazing work on degrowth. How would it work? How would it work in this scenario? How do we do this? How do we do that? So I think the need for an old philosophy rediscussed. None of this is, it's a kind of digging into what has been lost and representing it, because an awful lot of what is in the book is really quotations. It's not me writing. It's just, here's what so-and-so said, here's what so-and-so said, here's what the Johansa said, here's what they said about this here. So there's an awful lot of quotations there. So I think our job is to have that ready for whenever, whoever is willing to listen. And even if nobody listens, I think another person said to me at one stage, said, the issue of morality is not the outcome, it's the process. It's not, I'm not going to do this because it doesn't matter, because we're all going to die and it's all going to belong to sixth mass extinction. that's, therefore you've no morality if you say that. If I'm going to do this because it's the right thing to do. I don't care whether I achieve anything by the doing of it. It's the right thing to do. It's not the outcome that matters from a genuinely moral standpoint. Is this the right thing to do? And if there's only the two of us that agree with that, that's all that matters to me. And that, so, and it's hard to separate it from the outcome, because you want to see, like I'd like to see, this book, if for nothing else, from an egotistical point of view, because, I've as much of this man in me, you can't get away from these things. And I think one of the things that we said earlier is not to say that we're saying men should have no say. We're saying that men should come back into balance. That they shouldn't be dominating 90% of the stuff. That they should come back where the male and the female is roughly 50%. Whether it's the male in the water, the mother mountain, the male in everything, and the male in the female. But the problem with most men today is that they see harmony and balance as discrimination. If they don't have 90% of the power, they get ill, they get depressed, they get sick. If they have to many men, if they have to come back to 50%, they'll go crazy, because they can't cope with balance. And how do we, somehow shift that? Because I think that's our greatest challenge, is with the men and the so-called good men that are out there, that claim at least that they're good. How good are they really? This is far more a challenge to men today than it is to women. I think, although we need everybody on board, but I think the men coming back into the community rather than trying to dominate it. And I think we've some chance of that in Ireland more than in other societies, because I think we are genuinely more community oriented. Not that we're perfect in any sense, but like I grew up in communities in Longford or places like where we would always slag people. We never really looked up, certainly when I was young, to the people who had made it. We were always very cynical towards those sort of people. There was a great, I know I'm jumping around a bit, but there was this great joke that, or I thought it was anyway, but it's two fellas driving in the US, and they come around the bend, and one and they see this great big mansion on the hill, and one turns to the other and says, "One day I'm going to be like this guy." And then it swaps to two driving in Ireland, and they come around the bend, and there's a great big mansion on the hill, and one looks to the other and says, "One day I'm going to get that bollocks." And I used to think that was a terrible thing. I used to think, oh, that's a terrible attitude. But then I realised, there's a lot of healthiness in it. There's a lot of, equality, and so I think and that's the same thing in the Johan side. There's remember, you're insulting the meat, like this.
Yeah.
This idea of, and they said, why do we insult the hunter? So as to tame the heart. Because we know if we don't tame the heart of the hunter, that they can become a very dangerous figure. And I think there is that taming the heart. Like I played Gaelic football a lot when I was younger, and people would congratulate you by slagging you, about the point. If you had a good game, they'd tell you about the point you missed, or the goal you missed. But they'd be laughing, and they'd be clapping you on the back while they'd be doing it. So you'd know they were congratulating you, but not too much. And I think that's a beautiful thing. At the end of the All-Ireland final, the captain, they're not talking about themselves. They're not congratulating themselves. They're talking about the people who cleaned the boots. They're talking about the people who made the sandwiches. They're talking about... So I think there's these wonderful elements that still exist within Irish society that are very, very strong in many communities, and are probably dying in others. But I think we've a lot that can be rekindled in Irish society, imperfect as it is in so many ways, but there's a lot of good stuff that is not totally lost.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's just there below the surface and it could be reignited. That's if we haven't become too contaminated by the thinking coming out of the US, which we're, as I would say, Irish society is very prone to looking at what's happening in America and seeing it as being all good, all great there. And you might have a point there about taming the heart, because in the States, it's always about positive affirmation and praise, and it really is about the individualism as opposed to community that we have here. And thankfully, so far, we haven't adopted that. And as the state seems to be heading into a state of disintegration quicker than other Western countries right now, as you say, perhaps Ireland has time to learn from that and not follow the exact model that's coming from, politically wise, coming from the States. Sure, we'll see what happens.
We'll see what but we're where we are, Marilla, and is we're trying to do our best, and we'll see what happens, but we're not rolling over.
No.
We're not rolling over, and the work that you've done, the community and Fatima and all those amazing people, and those 50,000 signatures, and it's just extraordinary. And that to me as well, the other big lesson is none of the genuine hope is going to come from Brussels, or going to come from Dáil Éireann, or going to come from any of those places. Those places are too compromised. It's going to come from communities. If it's going to come from anywhere, it's going to come from the Sperns. This is where the new energy is going to come from. The new respect is going to come from. And then enough of them linking up will give the politicians courage.
Yeah.
Enough of them linking up will, because there's lots of politicians out there, decent people.
Yeah. For sure.
But they're in a system where they can't exist. If you question growth as a politician in Ireland at the moment, that's the end of it. You're finished. You're gone. And because they know the Irish people will vote them out. So if we don't change at the kitchen table, there will be no change. And if 1 million kitchen tables and then 1 million community halls can get it going, we have some chance for not to save this crashing, because it will crash, but to have a retreat rather than a collapse. And let me tell you, a retreat is much better than a collapse, particularly for our grandchildren. If we claim, like a lot of your friends, the golfers out on they claim to love their grandchildren so much, in the process. That they're often the people who voice their greatest love for their grandchildren. That what we are leaving, in all likelihood for our children, but certainly for our grandchildren, is an absolute horror of horrors.
I suppose for folk like that to stand up and be counted in the world, it would force them to reevaluate their whole lives and perhaps see the nonsense of their lives which, you know, there are aspects of my life that I am not proud of, and wishing I'd got to where I am. But you can't, you know, power to those with wisdom and wisdom to those with power. You know, you can't.
Yeah.
Wisdom comes dropping slowly from the veils.
And painfully, well, the exact same with me. You know, like I have, you know, traveled the world on business or technology, and so the damage I have done is probably 100 or 200 times more than the average person has done. So there is this, like, that's why the first chapters it wasn't, I was initially going to call it a witness statement, but then I called it a confession. you know, so yeah, there's this sense of personal guilt and personal, sense of what we could have done better, but all we can do is right now is go into the future with a bit of dignity and try to be as good an ancestor as we can.
Yeah, and I really get what you're talking about there with the guilt. I was explaining to, I think probably Fidelma recently or whatever, you know, I go into a supermarket and it's a guilt-laden trip from start to finish. And I don't want to buy this because I know X, Y, Z about it, and I don't want to buy that because... And it makes living difficult,
It does.
and the enjoyment of life, you know, to savouring life as opposed to saving it. You know, I'm in perpetual save mode, and I should be savouring it, and then there are times I just give up. I can't do this. I can't do it any longer. These choices.
And that's okay. I mean, you can, and then you pick it up. Yeah, but it's Ozilda, my wife, is like, she reads everything.
Yeah.
You know, she's, and I'd say without her, I wouldn't have written this book. I'm pretty certain that, and because she taught me so much about these things, you know. But she reads every label and everything and checking up it, and it's a full-time job almost practically, because you know, you look at something and you think it's organic, you think it's this, but it's full of sugars, or it's full of, you know, it's and you know, but we can only do the best we can, and I think we can savor, you know, we can savor a lot of, like, to me, one of the, by far the best things, forget about the products, is meeting people like yourself and Fidelma and all these wonderful people that are doing something, you know, that is far greater to savour than any product we find in a supermarket.
Yeah. Okay, we'll have to put that down. I could talk here all day to you, but it'd be a 24-hour podcast. So let's come back to the book. And my next question was, for me, one of the most difficult threads in the whole book was the all about waste. The obvious waste, and then the hidden waste that we never know about or never see. Where do you think waste and the damage that technology causes, you know, where's the intersection of that? And I just know what you're going to say. The answer is on it. But do you think ordinary people have an understanding of the waste that's occurring in the world?
No, it's well hidden. I mean, waste is capitalism's greatest product. You know, waste is capitalism's greatest brand. I mean, it is not an accident of the capitalist society. It is the core output. Like there was an executive in the 50s said about plastic, in the plastics industry, says, you know, the future of plastics is in the trash can. You know, so planned obsolescence, etc. The faster they can get us to waste, the more money they can make. And it's all about speed and accelerating the concentration of wealth. They're on most of these people in the tech industry, you see, they're on drugs already. They're on all the weirdest drugs, actual drugs. You know, these are weird people who work for Palantir or Musk or whatever. These are strange, hyper people. They can't get money fast enough. They can't get market share fast enough. They can't do so-called innovation fast enough. And all of that is dependent on waste. So it's not that they forgot about designing a product so that it can last 20 years. It's not about that they forgot about designing a product so that when it comes to its end of life, it can be easily disassembled and its parts reused and its materials reused. They deliberately design these products so they have the shortest lifespan possible and so that they cannot be easily repaired or recycled. So the creation of waste is the core strategic or tactical underpinning of the growth debt cult. Growth requires waste. The more waste, the more growth. So we are trapped in this growth debt cult, which involves basically the destruction of our environment in order to create profit and capital in the process. So most people, of course, are not aware of this because you know you're never going to see on the advertising billboards the end of the product, the computer or the smartphone dumped in Ghana or in Pakistan or otherwise. You're never going to see the pictures. All of that is carefully hidden. All of that is carefully controlled until it gets to a point where it can be no longer hidden, where it has heated up the oceans or it has acidified the oceans or plastified the oceans, or there is no blood sample taken today that does not have forever chemicals in it, and who knows how many other chemicals. There's no rain that falls today without forever chemicals, and these are just around since the 50s in the process. And there's a million other of these chemicals out there doing their thing in the process. So we are getting to the point where they can't be hidden for too much longer. But the vast majority of people are unaware, blissfully out on their golf course or wherever they want to be, unaware of it because they don't want to be aware of it. We are where we are. It's waste is our product. Waste is what we'll be remembered for. There will be a plastic layer in the earth.
Yeah.
We will be the plasticine. The
plasticine layer. Well, believe that.
And silicon, the plastic and silicon, and they long after the Colosseum has collapsed and the Statue of Liberty and the pyramids, we'll be remembered for our waste. That's what our civilization gave to the world. Toxic waste, not waste from animals. Toxic waste which kills life. That's what we will be remembered for.
It really saddens me here living in the global north and the Western economy. I benefit so much from this technology, and that the waste ends up in the global south, poisoning children and food chains. And I knew it, but I didn't know it, and not the extent of it. And like for the last 10 or 15 years here, I have e-waste here in my house, and I don't know what to do with that because I know it's not been recycled 5% of it or something,
Yeah.
And it's a real source of annoyance because I didn't want to put it to the local dump or whatever, thinking this could be used again by someone somewhere. Yeah. And it's a source of frustration and annoyance, but it's not. At least it's not poisoning me,
Yeah.
as it is. And, the privilege us Europeans have and North Americans, our privileged lives. And I just get disgusted by myself. And here I am, back to saving the world and not saving it. However, putting that aside, in the book as well, you talked a lot about exponential growth, and something people hear about but don't have absolutely no clue what exponential growth means. And when you look at mining and waste and energy together, where do you see that growth logic breaking down first?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question. So exponential growth, so extraordinarily difficult to understand. But one of the things that stuck in my head, a way of understanding it, was that, since 1970s, basically 50 years, we have done 3 times more damage to the planet than in the previous 200,000 years. That's exponential growth.
Yeah.
That exponential growth. So throughout the book is this idea interjected between the chapters of this blob, that's
green blob,
that's going to in 100 days. That's where the 99th day comes from. And, in 100 days, it's doubling every day, right? And in 100 days, it's going to cover the entire this 100 square kilometers of water, and just getting people to think like, what's that blob going to look like on the 10th day or the 20th day or the 30th day? Well, actually, until about the 80th day, you wouldn't even see it. Like if it was doubling every day, and on the 100th day, it would cover the 100 square meters. You wouldn't even notice it in this 100 square kilometers of water. You wouldn't even see it on the 80th day. It would be hardly noticeable. It only becomes noticeable on the 90th day. Mm-hmm. And it only really becomes noticeable on the 96th day. So that's a kind of the sense of exponential growth. It's invisible for so long. Like people were saying to me, I was writing about this stuff about data centers back maybe 2019, 2018, about their energy use. And people were laughing, scientists were, and scientists are among, there's good scientists, but there's a huge number of scientists who are feeding the propaganda machine cynically as well. So the scientists are coming to, sure, look at this. It's less than 1% of total energy consumption. It's nothing to be worried about. Why you're scaremongering, why you're talking about this sort of stuff, etc. So it was all, look at how we're able to expand, and we're still less than 1%, and that was their story, but it was growing exponentially. So suddenly, all of a sudden, it did become 1%, and then it's 2%, and it's 6%, and it's 12% and then it's 25% in Ireland. So all of a sudden, and then all these scientists that were given out to me suddenly disappeared. Were no longer around to respond to my emails or any stuff like that. They had done their cynical job 6 years earlier for their paymasters, Amazon or whoever was employing them to spread the propaganda. So that's, that sense of, it's almost too late when we see it, when we really see the problem. In the process, so it requires that seeing it before it's visible, in a way, like to the visible eye. Mm-hmm. That requires a kind of an intellectual looking of that with a wise eye rather than a visible eye in the process. So, what can we do? The sad thing, I don't think we can do a lot because of the momentum that is here now with artificial intelligence, 10, 20 times more. A data center in 2020 might have cost 2, 3, 400 million euros to build. 5, 6 years later, one of these AI data centers could be 10, 15, 20 billion to build. So instead of That's exponential growth. So this massive accelerated, use of materials and waters, and so instead of the massive reduction that we needed, we've got a multiplication, a 10, 20 times. And they know, the technologists, they know they're building all their bunkers. They know it's going to collapse. They know what they're doing. That's the other. But there was a saying, I don't know where it came from, that a certain type of man would burn everything to the ground just to rule over the ashes. And I think these are the type of people who control the planet. I don't think most of us consciously said, let's have these people in control. I think they work behind the scenes, and then they got the propaganda machine going enough, etc. But the Musk, the Zuckerbergs,
Peter Thiel,
the Trumps, the Putins, etc. These people will burn everything to the ground to rule over the ashes, because they think they'll be ruling over them from their luxury gold-lined bunkers. But they won't survive it. That's the irony. When you destroy that much of the planet, it'll come around to get you. There won't be any safe place. You think you'll be okay in New Zealand, in a bunker in New Zealand. You won't be okay there. They won't be okay anywhere. But they don't care. They enjoy the thrill of it. It's a kind of, to a certain type of man, I think it's a murder-suicide. And they're kind of getting a thrill out of murdering the environment. And these are the people we have in charge. And as long as we have these people in charge, and as long as we look up to these sorts of people, these Musks and Zuckerbergs, and as long as we encourage the culture that supports these sorts of people, we have no chance. So we change the culture that rewards and looks up to these sorts of figures. That's the only possible long-term change that has any hope for the survival. Because there's no guarantee that we will survive as a species. There's a reasonable chance we'll survive as a species if we can remove from our cultures the Musks and the Trumps and the great men structures that govern us. But these structures are the engines of the sixth great mass extinction. And if we don't take away the engine, and it is a cultural and moral engine, not a technological engine, it is a type of male structure, governance, hierarchical, king, imperial structure, that is what will start everything again. So this is the challenge, and it begins with our disdain and our contempt.
Actually, I'm just beginning to detect on social media that there is a kind of disgust with the billionaires, and it's just becoming visible. I've noticed it over the past 18 months, and I thought that's interesting.
Yeah.
And it's what needs to happen. There's an element in me that thinks, cut off the head of the snake, you might get a 7-headed hydra instead. But and as civilizations collapse, we've many examples of the past, rulers that stood up and were counted tended to become even more crazy, so, people say, it'll be great, the midterm elections, Trump won't lose. It won't make a whit of difference, because he's only there until he's no longer useful, and he will be removed. I imagine he'll be retired maybe after the midterm elections or before the midterm elections, because they know he won't win it. However, coming behind are the young pretenders, and that's where the real problem is. But I want to put that down because, again, it's another great discussion. coming back to exponential growth, you have a theme of water running right through the book. Mining water, poisoned water, stolen water. For communities facing mining proposals, and talking about data mining here as well as ordinary standard mining. Why is water the first thing they should pay attention to?
Well, water's life. So, and if our water is poisoned, we have no future life, or it's massively degraded. We are losing water from the continents. The natural gravitational pull of water is towards the sea. It's the lowest point on the earth. So we're pumping so much water from the aquifers much faster than the natural systems of rain can replenish them. That water is going to the sea. So the continents are literally drying out. We have pumped so much water since the 1970s. We've affected the Earth's tilt in the process. So we not just have less healthy water, we have more less water on our continents. So without water, there is no future. And of course, without forests, there is no water. So it's all interconnected. What keeps the water as well, one of the reasons, another reason is not just that the water cannot get into the aquifers, is because it's moving too quickly across the land. And one of the reasons it's moving too quickly across the land is because the soils are compacted with industrial agriculture, fertilizer and huge machines that are compacting the land, that's modifying it and making it less porous. But the forest structures were wonderful ways of also slowing the water down when it would actually rain. So there's a whole, set of destructive interconnected things that we're doing that's damaging our availability of water. And of course, underneath our earth is, just like above our earth, are rivers, interconnected rivers. Below them are rivers, essentially. Water is not just little lakes down there, there are interconnections. So if you do the mining damage in the Sperrins, which unquestionably it will impact the water table, it's just a matter of time. That water table we could see the results of that damage, particularly in Leitrim or who knows wherever, because there's these very, very complicated underground water systems, so the damage will travel. And when we start poisoning here and poisoning there and poisoning there and the other where, with the, just jumping to the data requires water because these computers get very hot. And the water is by far the best coolant, much better than air. So huge quantities of water are required to cool these very hot. And AI gets 10, 20 times hotter because it does far more processing. You'll notice sometimes if you're using your computer to process a big file or stuff like that, you hear the fan kicking in. And that's because it's trying to cool down the processor because it's doing a lot of work, just like we get hot when we do a lot of work. When the processor starts doing a lot of work, it gets hot. So we've these massive increasing water demands, equivalent to the electrical demands. And a lot of these systems use what's called evaporative cooling. I won't go into it in detail, but basically a lot of that water goes up into the atmosphere. And that's another place it's actually been stored much longer, because as the atmosphere heats, I think by 1 degree, it can create 7% or something more, store more water. So a hotter atmosphere can store more water. So water is leaving the continents, leaving the aquifers, it's going to the seas, but it's also staying in the atmosphere. A lot more of it is staying in the atmosphere much longer. And then when it does rain, because there's so much more of it, we're much more likely to get these extreme storm patterns, which that sort of water creates incredible damage in ecosystems, because if the soil has been hurt by green revolution agriculture, it's much more prone to move to mud. So it desertifies or rockifies the environment. So, these are all interconnected problems. We're all said, oh, just look at CO2, just look at CO2. Yes, it's a huge problem, but water is also connected with warming, etc. So huge areas of complexities that we need to know. Everything is interrelated. CO2 is one card in a 52 deck of pain and pollution and destruction. We need to move to a holistic, total cost, total thinking of our environment.
Total system.
And certainly water is life, and it's under threat. Fresh water is under threat, and they say, oh yeah, we can do, we can build these wonderful machines and do the seawater thing. But every litre of seawater turned to fresh water creates something like the equivalent of 1.5 litres of salt that's going to poison and destroy the seas in that area. So, all of these techie solutions, they solve one problem over here and create 5 more over there.
Yeah, absolutely do. I think what landed for me in reading about water in the book, that the data centres have to use, they use fresh drinking water. They use drinking water, not just ordinary water, because it's pure.
It's pure.
And then I'm thinking, and I know there's a new data centre has been planned for Derry here, and I'm thinking, well, there's the data centre that's going to be sucking up billions of gallons of water a year, and then there's billions of gallons of water going to be used up in the sperns. Where does that leave drinking water for the sperns? And doesn't take, and you might say we've plenty of rain here and plenty of water and groundwater. So far.
Yeah, they said that in Uruguay. They said they thought they had so much rain and so much fresh water. They wrote water into their constitution as a constitutional right, and then the droughts came and sent to their capital city, I can't remember its name, became the first city in the world to run out of water. So, good old Uruguay was Ireland. I mean, they say we're in climate change. We're in an environmentally rapidly changing environments, and so it's all delusional politicians chasing 0.01% on a GDP, all in the growth debt cult, anything that'll get them elected for the next election. And if that wipes out the water for their grandchildren, they basically don't care. Although with a smile on their face, they'll love to take pictures with their grandchildren.
Yeah, giving a grant for a small water scheme somewhere at some village somewhere.
Yeah, sure.
Anyways, you finished your book, and the title of the last chapter was "All Were Indigenous Once." Why did you choose to end the book there?
Well, I think we were talking earlier about, where is the knowledge, where is the wisdom? So much of it has been lost, but where is it left that we can learn from? And it is from Indigenous cultures. Were they perfect? Of course not. They were multifarious. They were, as I said, the chapter, all were Indigenous. Europe was Indigenous. By Indigenous, meaning, my interpretation of it, if being of the land, of respecting where you live, being unified with where you live, caring about your rivers and your mountains, and caring about your local environment. The essence of Indigenous is the essence of being local and seeing everything as interconnected. And so that was where I wanted to end. I don't like even using this word hope anymore, because it's like this toxic hope, that if you're not being hopeful, if you're not saying there's a new technology that's going to solve this, you're not going to be listened to. But there's hard lessons to be learned. And I think within the culture, one of the things that that I read there as I was compiling the chapter was, I think, from the Cree Nation, that said to, he died last year, wonderful guy, Mansion McGann, that come back. We need you to come back. We need the Irish to come back. The Irish have been so important to this story of whatever the native stories, so to speak. And I sent him an email. I asked him, are the Irish Indigenous? And he replied, and it's in the book, and he said, no, we've lost our Indigenous nature, but we need to rediscover it, and people need to rediscover it before it is too late. So I think, we have something here, as all peoples have, in varying degrees, that are willing to look closely enough and to listen closely enough. We have an ancient culture that was far from perfect, but it sought to live in balance, and it sought to respect the oaks and the forests and the rivers, and these messages were, when you see them from an environmental point of view, they seem really scientifically wise, because they say, the mother mountain, respect the mountain, respect her, don't mess with don't damage or over damage nature. Be very careful and thankful for what you do. You can see these are people who are seeking to live in balance. And the thing is, if we don't live in balance, we won't live. Certainly our grandchildren won't live. There won't be life if we don't find balance. And even others will say, well, sooner or later the sun will die. And of course, yes, everything will change. And there will come a point where even if we were the best stewards, even if we were the best ancestors, that our environment would change. An asteroid would hit, and it wouldn't be no longer suitable for our type of life. But we can slow down that process. We can be good ancestors, that we live today in a way that this wonderful gift that we have been given, we care for it so that it can last as long as possible. This beauty can last, and we can pass it on in the best possible condition.
And I think that's just a good place to leave this conversation. Gerry, thank you for coming on the podcast and speaking about what I think must be your magnus opus. Would you agree?
I think so.
I'm really glad that you did it for all of us. And it is a witness statement, there's no doubt about it, or your confession. It's been brilliant. Could you tell us where we could get it before we go?
GerryMcGovern.com, Roots and Hot Press, who I've written for over the years. They're selling pre-orders of it now at the moment. So in all good independent bookstores is the plan. And if any interesting alternative bookstores are listening to this, please get in touch with me. I'm going to build this slowly. Maybe whether I want it or not, it's going to build slowly, but I'm not looking for a massive immediate impact. I want to build this slowly and in a controlled way, and with people who really care. And if there's organisers who want to organise events or stuff like that, get in touch with me as well. And we try and do for this tour. It's all going to be at cost. Because to me, the message is vastly more important than anything else for the that could come from the book. That as many people can read it as possible.
Okay, that's great. And I'm glad to hear you're not putting it on Amazon. I'll put all that into the show notes as well so folk can look it up. And I'll put your tour into the show notes as well. We'll have the dates from Jacinta and people can check it out there.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gerry. And
Thank you,
look forward to seeing you very soon now at our meeting.
Soon.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely looking forward. You know, it's a great gift to know that so many people out there are bearing witness.
Yeah. Thank you, Gerry.